Io chiamerei il primo relatore, che non vedo, ma da qualche parte c'è, Joe. Joe, can you come here? Thank you very much.
Un grande applauso a Joe. Una vera figura che ha fatto la storia del hardware hacking in particolare. Parleremo di wallet. Che cosa succede se a un certo punto noi perdiamo il nostro portafoglio virtuale? Come fare per
Dobbiamo
recuperare?
stare tra le linee gialle perché c'è il forensic gates, poi ci ammazzano qua e they're gonna kill us here, and then the forensic guys will come and...
So if I go outside of this line, all of you have to yell at me. So if I'm over here, no,
exactly,
and then over here, no. So, okay, I'll remember to stay in here.
So thank you very much to come here. It's a very pleasure for HackInBo.
Yeah, Joe is a very famous person in our field, is worldwide famous. So I'm really looking forward to your talk. And thank you for joining us. It's really, really appreciated.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Joe. You have the floor.
Okay.
Whoa.
Cool. Grazie. Buongiorno. That is the extent of my Italian, so I'm going to now speak in English. I hope that's okay. So, yes, thank you for having me. Thank you to the whole HackInBo team for bringing me out here and treating me so well. I'm still full from our dinner from last night and still full from the dinner the night before, so it's been really, really fun. And, of course, thanks to all of you for coming and attending the show. It's going to be really, really fun. So, yeah, my name is Joe Grand, and I am a hacker. I grew up as a hacker at a time where really it was all about curiosity and exploring and learning new things, and there wasn't a business around it, there wasn't an industry around it, and it's just something I've always loved to do, and that has turned into a career where I spend a lot of time teaching about hacking, especially hardware hacking and electronics, and also doing some cryptocurrency recovery work, which is what this talk is about. That really is using my hacking skills in this particular way. But as you know, your skills can be used for lots of different things across lots of different fields. And right now, it happens to be cryptocurrency. So there's some fun stories that I'll talk about. This is also my first time in Bologna, so it has been great. And yes, if I do, I know you probably can't see the lines here, but if I do walk too far, then yell at me. It'll be fun. It'll be like an interactive, thing. Okay, so this whole story, like how I got involved in cryptocurrency, I am going to say I'm not like a cryptocurrency person. And I know there's discussion about cryptocurrency, is it good or is it bad? For me, it is irrelevant to the process of my goal is to get data from devices. And in this case, it happens to be getting private keys or recovery seeds that can then help somebody get access to their wallet. Just like some of the digital forensic examples of things going on, I'm basically doing the same thing, except a lot of times I'll share my information about what I learn and I'll give presentations about it. But really, it's using my skills regardless of the technology itself. But how I got involved in this, it was during the kind of COVID, end of lockdown, so I travel a lot, but there was no traveling going on, and somebody had emailed me and said, hey, I have a cryptocurrency wallet I'm locked out of. When I first bought the cryptocurrency, it wasn't really worth that much, but now it's worth $2 million. Can you help me get the money out? And I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds kind of cool. Like, I'd never worked with cryptocurrency stuff, really. This particular device that he had is called a Trezor Model 1. It's an older type of hardware wallet, where at the time, it was one of the only hardware wallets. And I had known some existing research that some friends of mine had done about a technique called fault injection that I'll mention that could be used to defeat the security. So I said, great, how hard will it be to just replicate the work that my friends have done, help this guy out, and it will be a good way to learn about a new technique. Because one of the things that is fun for me about doing this work is that there's always different projects, and this presentation, by the way, there's different stories of different techniques of hardware hacking that you can use for different things. And for me, if there's some motivation or excitement to learn something, I will. So this was the perfect opportunity of learning a new technique and then maybe even getting paid, which would be great. So I started down this path, and basically it ended up taking me a couple months to take what was publicly known and turn it into something that would work, I thought, safe enough so I wouldn't accidentally like erase the guy's money, which would be really bad. If I had wiped his device and the funds were gone, that would be very upsetting. And he would probably hate me for the rest of his life. So I had to really be careful about how I'm doing this attack. This is what the circuitry looks like inside. This particular product it uses a general purpose microcontroller called the STM32F2. This particular device is in millions of different products out there. It just happens to be used for this version of the Trezor. And the technique I was using is called fault injection, where you're basically intentionally causing the chip or a system to misbehave at just the right point in time to cause it to do something that you can control. So defeating some sort of security check or authentication or something like that. It's sort of like, the example I use is like turning off the lights really quickly, off and back on again. And is something gonna happen? And the goal really is to kind of disrupt the normal operation of the system. There are a lot of different ways to do it. I'm sure there are some demonstrations and some examples around of different techniques. What I was using at first is called voltage fault injection, so I'm doing it on the actual power line of the chip. This is what my setup looked like. So pretty rough, and I wasn't intending to do this as a business or as a project, as a side project. This was a one-off thing. So I have my lab set up like you would for a one-off type of project. I have does this have a laser? Oh, it has can you see the laser? It's only on this one, okay. I'll try not to shine it this way. So this is the Trezor that I had wired up, and in this case, this device has a debug interface, which is a way that you can basically debug the chip. So just like if you were going to debug a piece of software, you can step through code, you can change registers, you can change memory, all of these things that you can do on actual hardware. But this particular chip had that interface locked. And that was the security mechanism that I had to defeat of like, how can I get through the security mechanism so that I can get to the data inside the chip? So this was the main chip. This was some interface circuitry to connect. This device over here is called the chip whisperer. That's what I was using to do my fault injection, which is also known as glitching, if you see that term. Up here is my debug interface. So this is what would connect to the debug interface if I'm able to get through the security to enable the debug interface. And then over here, it turns out this is something I didn't need, but I didn't know that yet. This is a PHY whisper, so it basically is a protocol analyzer to monitor USB traffic, and then you can actually trigger on that to say, okay, if a certain amount of data is coming across, use that as a trigger to start something else. I'm just using it to power cycle the Trezor. And the concept here is I'm basically power cycling the device. At some point in time during the boot process, I'm then doing my fault injection, and then I check to see if the debug interface has been re-enabled, and if it has, that means I now have access, and then I can do the second stage of the attack, which is to read the data out. So it's kind of this multi-stage thing. This is what my oscilloscope looked like. So the oscilloscope lets me visually see the signals. Oh, we can play the video, by the way, Franco. We have kind of a loop, and this is showing what the voltage line is doing that I'm feeding to the Trezor. And that's where I'm trying to, where this dip comes down here. That's actually, I'm bringing the power down on the chip to try to defeat the security. So I basically try this over and over again. I power cycle, I do my glitch, I look for the debug interface. Power cycle, look for the glitch, debug interface. And there's a whole bunch of characterization that goes into that of like, how do I know when to do the glitch and the timing and so many things. And that's what took me 3 months to sort of figure out. And I thought it was good enough. Like by doing this, I basically got to the point where I could then prove to this guy that had $2 million that I was able to do it. So I did it on a couple devices, and then he flew across the country, met me, and then I did it in person, which is, I'll explain that in a second. So this is a screen showing sort of my tool that I was using. Up here you can see it says connecting to CPU, so I'm trying over and over again as I'm trying to enable the debug interface as I'm glitching. And then you can't see where it's successful, but down here I can actually then go and connect directly to the chip, which is pretty cool. So now I've defeated the first stage of security, which then, for this version of code, because it's an older product, the recovery seed and the pin was stored in the clear inside of the memory. So once I got debug access, it was actually stored in RAM, which is the one area of memory that you had access to with this particular security, even if you've defeated it. There's another level of security that we had to defeat for later things to prevent you from getting flash memory access. But in this case, because of a bug in the Trezor user code, I could just get the recovery seed, which is blurred out, and then his PIN and everything. So this was the story of how I got involved with cryptocurrency. And I'd been making some videos, kind of YouTube videos with my phone, just filming projects for years. And my wife said, you should film this. Like, you should show people that you're still a hacker. Because a lot of times it was like engineering-related stuff. So it was her idea to film the video. So we made a video about it. This was the guy whose device that I had successfully hacked. The video went viral. If you want to watch it, it's on YouTube. If you just search my name, you'll see it. But it's a real, dramatic story of the whole process. And we filmed the process live, which I don't recommend doing. It was very stressful. But it ended up working, which was very cool. And this is what kicked off, like, oh, it looks like, if this guy has problems, maybe other people have problems. And then it just turned into thousands of emails and thousands of, like, really interesting projects. Some of them ended up being worthy of talking about, and some of them didn't. So we figured at that point, wow, everybody involved in cryptocurrency must be technically, competent. They understand what they're doing. They know what they purchased. This is where I started learning a lot about kind of human nature and the memory that people have, where they think they might have something and they don't, which it turns out human memory is totally, if you're in law enforcement, which I know there's some, like, people think a lot of things that are not true, and they make up things not on purpose. They just think that what has happened is true. So it's really, all of us do it. It's really interesting. And this is one story. So this was another video that we filmed, but I am going to give away the ending because it's a cool story, but you can still watch the video because it's kind of fun. So this was somebody that had contacted me and said, hey, I have an old Samsung phone. So this is, I don't remember what year, probably at least 10 years old. And he said, I remember buying cryptocurrency from a guy in a coffee shop. I had to transfer money to him. It was this like secret, shady operation to try to get cryptocurrency. I bought a bunch with my old phone. I had a child. I forgot about the phone. I threw it in a shoebox. And a couple years later, he says, oh, I remember I bought cryptocurrency. So he thought that he bought a certain amount of cryptocurrency that would have been anywhere from $6 to $30 million on his phone. So we said, oh, okay, that's an interesting project. I hadn't done a lot of mobile phone forensic work. Because this was an older phone, it was like, all right, this should be pretty easy to do. And of course, I did my testing on devices that I bought on eBay, and I could do some things with it. So it was very exciting. And we decided that we should film this video also, because again, we didn't know how many of these stories were real or not. This particular guy couldn't come to my house. He lived a couple hours away in Seattle, Washington, but he drove a bus for the city, and he just didn't have time to come down and see us, but he was also very paranoid and didn't want to give up his device and just send it to me. So we said, okay, what if we bring all of my equipment to a hotel room in Seattle, and then he can come over and I'll hack his device? Also a bad idea. Doing anything live in front of a customer or any, a lawyer or something like that, it can be a lot of stress, but it ended up making for a very entertaining video. It just wasn't really entertaining for me at the time. So I basically brought everything up to the hotel room that I thought I would need, kind of planning for the best scenario, the most easy scenario, and then also planning for the worst case of like, what if something goes wrong, what can I do? So it turns out we were kind of in the worst case scenario. So the guy brought his phone, we opened it up. This particular type of phone, a lot of phones back in that day had an interface called JTAG, which is an industry standard debug interface that we see on microcontrollers and modern kind of IoT consumer-related devices still, but not as much on mobile phones, right? Mobile phones are much well-designed now, much more secure. You need significant expertise and significant tools with modern phones. But in this era, these devices had an interface on it with a connector. So all I should have, in theory, needed to do is plug in to the connector that is here with my special hardware to connect to the debug interface and just dump all the memory. JTAG, as an example, similar to what I'd use in Trezor. It basically is like having root access in hardware. So if just like having root access on a device in software, JTAG access debug interface gives you that level of control. So it really is a huge thing if you can get to it. And these phones didn't have any security. So you could just connect up. The problem though is it wasn't working for me. I had a little connector that I plugged in to go to my JTAG interface, which was an Octo Plus, which is a device that specifically is designed to use debug interfaces against different mobile phones to extract data and unbrick them and do other things. But it wasn't working. So the cable wasn't working, and I'm like, why, what? That's a bad thing. I thought maybe the cable was broken, there was a bad connection. So we basically had two choices at that point. One of them was to solder individual wires to the connector to basically try to hardwire the interface to get rid of any potential risk if the cable was bad. The other option, these phones use a memory device called eMMC, which is embedded multimedia card. It basically is like an SD card, but in a memory device. And that was really common for mobile phones at the time. Now they've moved away from that. But again, we see the same technology in modern consumer electronics, just not mobile phones. For eMMC, I could tap wires down onto specific parts of the phone and get access to memory that way. So that was the other option, except that was a little more risky because I might damage components and do something. So we were really worried. And the guy ended up deciding for us. I gave him the choices. He said, let's solder the wires. So we see the wires here. I had to hold it in a very specific way, and then finally got to the point where I could connect to the debug interface, and then I could extract all of the memory, which was this was 16 gigabyte eMMC. I had miscalculated the amount of time that was actually going to take. So if you watch the video, you'll see this whole drama of like the hotel trying to kick us out of the hotel room, and we're halfway done with the extraction. And I'm like, I don't want to move the hardware. It's going to mess everything up. So it was this whole thing. But we did end up succeeding getting all of the memory off of the device, and we were so happy about it. We're like, we did it. This is going to be great. LeVar is there over here, like he's going to be rich, he'll be able to, care, it'll be better for his kids, and then this was his friend here, so everyone was excited. And again, this was very early in my journey of like thinking everybody knew what they had. This is what he ended up having. Once we got access to the data, we figured out what his swipe password was to get access to the phone. I don't know if you can see that, but it wasn't $30 million worth of Bitcoin, and it wasn't $6 million worth of Bitcoin. This was 0.003 Bitcoin. At the time we did this, Bitcoin was maybe 50,000. So it was basically nothing. And it was a shock. More to him than me. But this is what really hardened me at that point of like, I'm generally kind of skeptical about things anyway. This was like, all right, every project I do from now on, I'm just going to assume it's empty, and then if there is money on it, great. That helps people. So yeah, this ended up being something that didn't turn out the way that he wanted, though the hack was successful, and I learned some new techniques about using those tools. So for me, it was a win either way. This project was one where a guy emailed me and said, I have a device that has some money on it. This was, I think, a couple $100,000, so not millions, but still a huge amount of money. And he said, I threw my device into a lake for testing, and then I couldn't get it out of the lake. It was an interesting story. By the way, when we do projects, we do, talk to the customer, we interview them, we do a background check to make sure it's not some, criminal organization or something doing something. So, and he passed all of that, but the story was still like, why would you throw a device with money on it for testing into the lake? You would do that with a different device if you were testing. So I think maybe he was trying to hide the device from somebody, whatever it is, not my business. But it was an interesting story. So he basically had to, he couldn't get it out. He had to wait 7 months, and then he hired a dive crew that actually went with, scuba gear down into the water, got the device, and pulled it out. The interesting thing about this story is he knew his PIN, but he was really worried that the device could have been damaged by being in the water, which is a valid thing. So This is really less of a hack and more of a repair, but still kind of a hack, because a lot of times, hacking, we're just thinking about creative ways to solve a problem. It doesn't have to be newsworthy. You don't have to stand on stage and talk about it. Like, you can hack lots of things that don't have to be these, massive things. So this was one of the examples of, like, maybe I can hack this device in a way that I'm kind of repairing it just to get it working enough that we can then enter the pin and get access to it. So I looked at the layout of this device. This is called the Ledger Nano S. So it's a competitor to Trezor, one of their early devices as well. This one, though, all of the Ledger devices use what's called a secure element. And a secure element is a device specifically designed with security features to store important information. So to securely store information. And they have mitigations against fault injection and chip-level attacks and things that actually, like, if you're designing a secure system, this is actually a pretty good way to do it. You have a secure element that is your safe, that's keeping all the important stuff, and then you have your general purpose microcontroller that is handling the user interface and other things. There were some attacks against this as far as, like, modifying the microcontroller to display different things than what was actually happening on the device. But for me, I didn't really care about any of the front end. I just said, okay, if all of the secrets that matter are in the secure element, could I just take the secure element from his device, put it onto a donor board of a different device that I know works? Is that going to give me access to the data? And it turns out that, yes, that is a possibility. So here's the inside of the Ledger, where we have the microcontroller on the left and then the secure element with the big arrow pointing to it. So that was my target of, like, can I get that chip off the board? His particular board, when I opened it, it was totally corroded because it had been in the water for so long. It was just nasty. So I could have spent time maybe to diagnose that board and make sure it worked, but too risky, right? Because if I plugged that thing in, what if something was broken and it short-circuited the chip and erased everything? So I thought this little kind of surgery of replacing the chip was probably a good idea. But devices absorb moisture over time. So anytime you're doing, say, like chip off, if you are removing a chip from a board, devices absorb moisture, so the longer they're exposed to the environment, the more moisture the plastic packaging absorbs into the chip. And if you do something like chip off or any sort of technique where you're applying a lot of heat to the chip, the moisture inside the chip can expand, which could then expand enough to damage the chip, to break the wire bonds inside the chip and all of these things. So a really bad thing could happen. So I use this project as a perfect example to buy something new, which is also a really great reason to be involved in this, is like I can always upgrade my lab with new equipment and I have a reason to do it. This is a special device that I'll show you on the next slide, but I love this picture because it's snowing and the delivery guy is bringing this massive box over to my lab and he doesn't know what's in it and I'm just like, ooh, it's Christmas, showing up. This ends up being what's called a drying oven, and this is a device that basically has very controlled, precise temperature, and it's used for removing moisture from things, either electronics or chemical samples or other things. So this was the smallest one I could find, and basically with devices there's a standard, an industry standard in the engineering world of like how long do you have to bake a device to remove the moisture so when you do apply heat to the device to take it off you're not going to damage it. Like it's an actual known thing. Basically if you run the oven at 125 degrees C for 48 hours, you'll be fine with any sized device. For that little tiny device, I actually probably could have run it only for 6 hours and it would have been okay. But basically, I put the device in the oven because, again, the last thing I want to do is damage the device and be responsible for messing up something. Even if somebody doesn't have what they think is on the device, if I damage the device and they think they have $10 million on it, even if they have $1,000 in their head, they still have $10 million, and I would be responsible. So I really wanted to take these steps to be careful. So here's the process. I'm using hot air, which is a standard way of getting devices off of boards. There are other techniques as well, but in certain situations with certain chips, you need to heat the entire chip at the same time to get all of the solder connections molten to the point where you can remove the chip from the board. So this one was pretty easy to remove the chip. There is the chip that is off the board. And then here is my, I'm not going to say great soldering, but good enough soldering to solder the chip onto the new board. So now his chip that contains the secure element that has the security features or has the data that we want is now on this new board. And then I could plug it in and say, okay, is this going to work? And either it's going to power up and be fine, or it's not going to power up. And in this case, it powers up, we enter the PIN, and we had access to his money. So that was pretty cool of like, again, it doesn't have to be this mind-blowing project, but it was a simple sort of attack that maybe in this room we understand, but to people outside of the hacker world, like people just can't do this stuff. So it was fun to do something like this and help him, and then we got all the funds off and everything. So that was a good success. Anybody recognize this thing? Couple, yeah. If you were born probably like before 1980 or something. This is an ASUS PC. It was called like the EEE, and it was a little kind of portable computer PC back, I don't remember exactly when, early 2000s. So this case, somebody had emailed and said, I had a friend who was very into computers, very technically savvy. He was heavily into cryptocurrency like back in 2009, really early when it first started. He passed away, and then this guy was responsible for trying to get all the data off of his devices. And I talked to some of the guys that do forensics in Italy, and there was even a documentary or a news article about that having to deal with that if somebody passes away, and how do you get access to their data. And this was one of those stories of like, is it even possible? Because we don't know anything about the guy. Usually if we're doing some sort of brute forcing or password attack, like we would ask the person, how do you set your passwords? Let's look at other examples of passwords so we can try to narrow down how we're brute forcing. We didn't know anything about this particular owner of this device. But we decided to take the case because his friend's story made sense of like, if he was involved that early and he was technical, there's probably a lot of Bitcoin that could be useful. So in this case, I power up the device, and actually he had done this first, so we knew that this was the situation. Otherwise, we could have just taken the drive, imaged it, and found the data. So when he tried to power up the device, and then I verified this, during the boot up process, it says hard disk locked, enter user password. This was not a BIOS password, this was a hard drive password. And it was an ATA lock as part of the hard drive interface specification actually has a security feature, which I had no idea about. Like, it's been a security feature for years. I'd never seen it. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but for me, it was like, what? So I read about it and realized, like, a lot of times devices do have security features that aren't implemented, which is why we can hack so many things. But in this case, it actually had a security feature that was implemented. And that on its own is enough to say, okay, this guy, was paranoid. If he's enabling this hard drive check, at least he knows that it exists, first of all, and second of all, he's trying to protect something. So that was even a better indication of like, he must have something in there that's really useful. So my first goal was to defeat this hard drive lock. And I figured if I could defeat that hard drive lock, then I would have access to his data, then we can get access to everything. So you do have to remember, like, I'm not a digital forensic expert, so some of you, as I'm going through this, you might say, I have a better way to solve it. But wait until you say that. So, here's another example. So this is just showing primary master hard drive password status enabled. So it's like, oh, wow, there really is a password. I could have spent a lot of time with that particular hard drive, reverse engineering it, figuring out how that password worked, how that security worked. But a lot of times I'm a fan of, if there is a solution, I will find the solution first. If there's not a solution, I'll do it on my own. I do love learning new things, but in a case like this where there's so many unknowns of like, is there cryptocurrency? Is it worth doing? Like, I figured, let's see if there's anything out there that can help me. And I ended up finding a product that is specifically designed to remove the passwords from the ATA lock of devices. And this was a forensic company. I think they're based in China, but they have all sorts of different mechanical hard drive recovery solutions and some other things. So I said, let's just buy it. Let's just use the tool, see if it works, see if we can get past that password check. So I did, and I did this on a test device first, a reference device. and took the device out. This was actually probably on the real one at this point, but I verified that the tool worked before I did it on the real thing. So I take the device out, and you actually have to go through this process with the tool of taking the actual logic board off of the drive, run the tool, it tells you like plug it in, unplug it, put it back in, and then attach it back to the drive. It does all these things, and I think the password is in the actual firmware of the logic board of the drive itself, and I think there's also some data on the platters of the disk that I think are maybe preventing you from getting to it unless you know the password, something like that. But here I just ran the tool. This was the equivalent of like a hardware script kiddie, I guess. So here it's telling me, plug it in, take it out. And then I go through this whole process, and it says, password removal success. It's like, nice, that's awesome. The one thing that it doesn't tell you is what the password was, which from a forensic perspective could actually be really useful, because that might help us unlock other things, and we get maybe an idea about how he generates passwords, but we didn't know at that point. But we still got access to the drive, which was awesome. Here we boot up, and now it doesn't say enter password. Now it's just like, whatever default BIOS stuff, and then we can try to load the device. So like that was pretty cool. Except once we booted the device, we saw this screen instead. I don't know if you can all see that, but it's a TrueCrypt encrypted partition. So now we've defeated the password, and now he has a second level of disk encryption on his device. And we're like, well, damn. If we knew his password, that would have been helpful, because then we could do some brute forcing. But now we're at a TrueCrypt partition. I don't think, some of you might have a secret, but I don't think that we can brute force a TrueCrypt password in our lifetime unless we knew something that we could narrow down the search space. So this was kind of a bummer, but at the same time, it's like, okay, he definitely has something to hide on here now, right? So I have a copy of his image just in case somebody finds some vulnerability in TrueCrypt, or if you know of something, let me know. But this was one of those like, well, that's, we did what we could, and I'm glad I didn't spend too much time on it. But another example of this kind of roller coaster of doing this type of work. It's like you never really know what you're going to find. And then that brings us all the way back to the beginning. And I'd mentioned that the product I worked on at first, this Trezor that got me involved in this whole cryptocurrency wallet hacking adventure, was an older version of this Trezor. And it turns out, in my world, people aren't constantly upgrading devices. Because a lot of times you'll buy a cryptocurrency, a hardware wallet, you'll store your funds, you'll put it in a safe, you'll forget about it, whatever. So it doesn't matter. Most people are not going to go out and buy a new, most secure device every time. Just like, most people don't constantly update their computers, even though we should. But it's like, well, if I update the computer, is that going to then mess something up and break something? So I'm going to wait a couple months until everybody else does it. So I deal with a lot of older devices, which is great because they're still hackable. Newer ones are a little bit harder. But when I did that first attack, I didn't realize how lucky I was to actually succeed, yet alone do it with the camera crew there and the customer there. Like, when I started doing more research and more projects, it turns out that there was a risk of corrupting the data on the chip or completely wiping the chip. And luckily that didn't happen, but I didn't want it to end. I didn't want to have that be the end of my work. I said, I really want to get it to the point where I can improve on that project, make it better. As a hacker, that's what feeds me of how can I make this more efficient, learn more stuff, get it working better, and then eventually release that to everybody. So this is sort of where I'm at now. And I've been working with a colleague of mine in Belgium, Lennart Wouters, and over the past couple of years, he had reached out to me and said, hey, I know you did this work early on, I want to replicate it. And I'm like, well, it's not that great yet. So we've spent 3 years, refining it, and have learned so many things along the way. This particular platform is fault injection, but now I'm using electromagnetic fault injection, where I am injecting an electromagnetic field onto the chip, and based on where I am on the chip and the different parameters will cause, the misbehavior that we're trying to get, as opposed to voltage fault injection. So you get some more control of where your probe is, so you have some kind of physical control where you want to move your probe. You still have to deal with the parameters. It basically expands the number of things you have to figure out, but it's pretty cool. And then, of course, you could go to laser fault injection and more complicated things, but this is really, really an interesting field. So I built this whole platform that lets me automatically move the probe around and scan a target chip to decide, like, where's the most vulnerable area that I can do my fault injection. For later versions of the Trezor Model 1, there's also a device called the Keep Key that uses the same microcontroller. And then for the Trezor Model T, which is an STM32F4, all of those devices that are not the early version of Trezor firmware encrypt their contents, store them in the flash memory area, which is protected. So even if you do that first downgrade to get to the debug interface, you then need to defeat another level of security to get to the flash memory. And then you have to do some brute force, some pin brute forcing to determine the pin that you would then use to decrypt the data. Then you get the recovery seed. Then you get access to the funds. So it's a multi-step process. And this attack basically goes through that to do these multiple stages of attack. And it basically is something that is taking advantage of a problem in the boot ROM of the chip. So basically hard-coded code that executes in the chip before it runs the user code. So no matter what device, what product uses this device, all devices are vulnerable, unless STMicroelectronics, who makes the chip, fixes their code in the boot ROM to have a mitigation against this type of attack. So it really is fascinating of, like, there are billions of products that use these chips that happen to also be in those hardware wallets. So it's really, like, doesn't just have to be hardware wallets. That's what's so exciting for me of, like, yes, I'm using it for hardware wallets right now, but those tools that you have in your toolbox can be used against everything. And that really is the beauty of being a hacker, right? It's like you have these tools, how are you going to use it, in a way that hopefully helps society? But yeah, there's just so many things to learn and so many ways to apply the techniques. But I do really like that it's not just limited to cryptocurrency, because who knows what the next project is that I'll take on. Maybe it's not cryptocurrency, maybe it's something else. Here's what it looks like close up. We can play the second video here. And here you can even hear the sound. So this is on a test chip where I'm trying to characterize the vulnerable sections. I have some of my own code running on there, and I'm taking my probe and I'm moving it automatically, scanning the whole chip, and then looking at the results and seeing, is the chip crashing? Is it resetting? Is it just acting normally? Or is it doing some sort of glitch or fault in a way that's helpful? So there's a lot of time that goes into this stuff, but really, really cool. And actually, since I just came here, Leonard had figured out another technique that we're kind of going full circle back to voltage fault injection, where he had combined some of his knowledge and some of the knowledge that we did together, and then some other work that people have done into a different technique. So there's always something to learn, and it's very, very fun. So I'll leave you with this picture. Over these 3 years of learning, particularly about fault injection for the Trezors, but also doing all of these other stories, I've gotten a lot of messages, a lot of emails, a lot of requests for work. I think we've gotten pretty good at narrowing down the ones that are actually worth spending time on. Even if the value isn't huge, it really comes down to the story of, like, what is this person going through? How did they lose their funds? There's been some devices that have $10,000 that is life-changing to one person, and there's devices that have had millions of dollars where somebody goes, oh, that's nice, I'm glad I have access to it, but I don't really need it. So the value isn't really the story. The story is the people. And what we ended up doing is filming over these 3 years where I'd been working on refining this process. We've had this waiting list of like 30 people that have had devices that need help, specifically waiting to the point where I was comfortable to do it as sort of a bulk, like everybody at once, once I refined the attack. So we decided to do that, learning all these stories, and there was one person, I'm not gonna give the whole story away, that had a significant amount of money to the point, this is my office, by the way, and he insisted on coming to my house. In my office, this is in the garage next to my house. He insisted on coming, flew halfway around the world, came to my house to watch me do the attack in person. What you don't see here is the film crew, one of my partners watching, and the customer and his wife, everybody there. But because he had so much money, I was like, well, I don't want to be in there hacking this device with just a guy that, you know, maybe I've talked to a couple times and ran a background check. I want security. So we hired a security guard to come to my house, and he, you know, wanded us with the metal detector going into the office and everything. And his job basically was, when I hacked his device, this guy wasn't going to run over and knock me on the head and run off with it. We were talking about law enforcement and guns and things yesterday at dinner, and America's a lot different as far as guns in general. When we hired the security guard, I was like, I just need a guy to kind of overlook things. Like, I don't need much, but I want him to look like a badass. I want him to get dressed up and, you know, look scary enough that the customer wouldn't try to do anything. And I was like, we don't need a gun or anything like that. Like, it's a tiny place. We don't need a gun. And this guy who actually, he ran the gym where I was doing some self-defense training, he was like, there's no point in me getting dressed up in all of my stuff if I'm not going to have a gun. I said, okay. So what you kind of can see is he had a humongous gun in my office. And it was, yeah, I mean, that's not uncommon in the US. And probably pretty intimidating to the guy that came to the house because he was not from the US. But it was also a little bit scary of like, okay, this guy has a gun right next to me. But at the same time, it made me feel really cool and protected that nothing was going to happen because he was working for me. So I'm not going to tell you the end because we have filmed a whole bunch of this stuff, and we have a couple more videos coming out probably in January, I'm not exactly sure, that talk about all these personal stories. And it really is a fascinating world, and it's something that I'd never really thought about as a hacker, and a lot of my stuff is like, well, I'm curious about this, I'm going to do it. I never really thought about using my skills in a way that actually helps people. And what's been the hardest part is when people rely on you for something, like that normally, I've never had that before, right? Of like, oh, someone wants me to actually hack on this thing for a real purpose. A lot of times it's just been for fun and giving presentations. So there's this big stress about it, but also it's very satisfying to, again, use your skills in a way that helps people. And yeah, I wasn't expecting to get sort of that side out of it. So now not only am I learning new techniques and you know, kind of sharpening my own skills, but being able to use those and help people, which is pretty cool. So yeah, these videos will come out. You'll find out the whole story about that, but I did just want to say this is, you know, this is what's coming. And these are just some of my stories. Like, there are so many stories. Every day there's some new thing that happens, some new thing that comes up, somebody emails me. And I guess really the moral of all of this is, like, right now I'm doing this because I love it. That's really the main thing, right? Of finding the thing that you love to do. You'll have your own adventures, and I'm sure you have your own adventures. Every one of you could come up here and give a talk about stuff that you've experienced. And that's what's so cool, right? Of being able to share that information and learn from each other. So right now, this is what I'm doing. Who knows what will come in the future? But I know I will continue to hack on things, right? And that's the most important thing. So yes, thank you for coming, and enjoy the show, and hopefully you got some inspiration to do some hacking today. So, grazie.
Wow.
Thank you
very much. Amazing, amazing. I felt like at home for a little bit because it's like what I do, but it was like great. Thank you very much.
The story is the people, and you do the story today for HackInBo. Thank you.
Questions? Do you have any question? Yes, we have a question. Stefania,
Yeah.
you have a microphone? Abbiamo un microfono?
Qui.
Ah, okay, sorry.
Hi. I wanted to ask you, how do you manage to narrow down the timing to perform the glitching when
Right, so that is a huge amount of work. A lot of times you'll run loops, you'll have your own code in a device, so you at least can control sort of what's happening with the chip. And there are a lot of different techniques of kind of figuring that out. A lot of times basically, my first work was based on the work that these other guys did with voltage fault injection. They spent months trying to just like, okay, when the chip boots up, let's wait 170 microseconds, and that's where it is. So it sort of starts off with this huge range, and then you try to narrow it down by running loops and seeing what happens. Sometimes you get lucky and you say, ooh, this is the range to do it. Sometimes it takes months to figure it out. Right now, actually, right before I got on the airplane to come here, I started a test, because I'll be away for 2 weeks, a long time test that's doing my chip scanning, but I calculated it that I'm basically checking every position of the chip 200 times with different parameters using the same trigger point. So always having something constant, but changing the other things. And by the time I get back, I should have a whole map of like, where are the areas that I can then narrow down and work with? So you start wide and then you narrow it down. But there are some techniques. Adam Laurie gave a talk at NullCon in India a couple years ago. I think it was, I can't remember the name of the talk, but it was about characterizing glitching by running your own code on it and looking for known things that you can use as a repeatable way to trigger. Then how long do you wait? How wide is your glitch and all of that? So yeah, you try to keep something the same as a starting point, and then changing all the parameters in a very controlled way. So there's a lot of scientific process that you want to go through, only changing certain things, and then you narrow it down.
Thank you. Another question?
Any other question?
Hi, Joe. Well, first of all, welcome. I'm really pleased to see you here. Yeah. It's really just an honor. And so thank you so much for sharing everything about your adventures with Wallet. I don't really have a question at this moment. I just want to say that we are trying to arrange a voltage glitching demo this afternoon or in the next few hours. We just need to find the right location. So if you want to come to, once we find the place and booth to actually see that, and Joe, you will also
yeah, I'll hang out there, sure. Yeah,
Wow.
And that is that with electromagnetic? With
no,
EM
it's going to be voltage. We're
Okay.
going to bypass your boot on the DSP32.
Cool.
With voltage glitching. It's something that I did already also last year, but now, given the many requests that we had, okay, it seems I'm more or less forced to do that now.
Awesome. Yeah, now everyone wants to see a demo.
We'll find ways to do that.
Cool, okay, so be on the lookout for some fault injection demos later. That'll be really cool.
Wow, it was good.
Thank you very much, Joe. It was really amazing. Thank
Okay.
you very much for joining us.
Thank
And
you.
a round of
Thank you
applause
again.
to
Grazie.
Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Cool. I give this to you.
Thanks.